Welcome back to Periodic Furniture Studio. In this video we're building something that isn't a dining table, and that's kinda cool. Now what you're watching here is the last day of the build where I was just test fitting everything before it went out to delivery. But before we can get to it this stage, we've got to rewind the clock a little bit because there was a lot of work involved in this and we'd better just get into it. This bookcase is made from solid Tasmanian Blue Gum. This is quite a rare thing these days to see solid wood bookshelves because of, well, the advent of plywood with high quality veneer, but the thing is, once you see the end product, you realise that you don't get the same look with veneer panels. The entire build took close to 2 weeks. It's not that the build is overly complicated, it is just that there was so many panels to glue up, and this isn't even all of it that you're looking here. This is just the uprights and the top and bottom pieces. Now, I'm not using the jointer or thicknesser on this project, and that is because it's just not practical to do so. Instead, I use my wide drum sander, which has a really long bed on it, to flatten out the faces and create 2 parallel surfaces, and then I use my panel saw to actually joint the edges. The panel saw is a good option here when you're using this sort of timber because you can take off a large amount or a small amount in one pass. It's faster, more accurate, and you don't get any tear out. Then it was on to the glue ups. Now you sent me to a lot of glue ups before, so I cut most of this out, but here you can see the kind of process. Reinforce it with biscuits, clamp it, let it dry, and then put it off to the side. Wait a while so you can get some clamps back and keep going. This was probably the most painstaking part of this build. Glue up after glue up after glue up. Now, I don't have that few clamps, but this time I really felt like I was lacking. Once the glue ups were dry, we flattened them again and ripped them to final width. I always leave my panels slightly wide at this stage, that's so I can actually make sure everything comes out of the clamps identical. Now, it wasn't all just flat panels, we also made some frame and panel sides for the lower part of the unit. There's no reason for this other than aesthetics, and, personally I think it looks better. I used a dedicated frame and panel setup on my router table, and then just glued it all together. Then we could move on to the joinery. The first thing I did was just mark out everything for reference. Now, this wasn't vital because I was going to use stop blocks on my panel saw to do so, but it's just good to have there as a visual check. Make sure you don't stuff up, especially after the amount of work that went into the glue ups. Once everything was there, we used a dado stack which is sized just for our panels, and we just cut everything in one go. The downside of doing a joint like this is that you would actually see the joinery once the piece is finished, and I didn't want that, so what I did was I glued on a thin strip onto the front edge of these panels, and that way you wouldn't be able to see the joinery and things just look a little bit more professional in my opinion. We trimmed it off, and we also notched out the upright panels, but we didn't show this in the video. Now, the glue up on the top piece was pretty straightforward. We just applied glue and clamped it all together. We made sure things were square and we let it sit. And then there was more clamps. Now people often ask me what my favourite clamps are, and they're usually surprised to hear it's not actually the Bessie parallel clamps that are my favourite. It's just what I had. My favourite are the T-style sash clamps, which are super heavy duty and you can basically split the wood if you're not careful. Now, the shelves are all held in place using shelf pins. Now, this is so that the customer can remove a shelf if they need the extra height, but we didn't put additional holes in there for adjustability because, well, that's not what they wanted. Here came a quick test fit of all the shelves, and there was a little bit of trimming, which was a shame. Some of my marking out was just a hair off, so the middle shelf was a little bit tighter than the rest, but you know, that's not a huge. Now for the finish, I'm just using a soft oil, which in this case is a linseed oil, which was purified and had most of the stuff taken out of, and it went really well. Now I did run out of memory on my card, and I just didn't want to wait for it to upload to the computer, so I went ahead and I just finished everything. It took a while, but it was well worth it. Now, it wasn't very obvious in the actual finish, but the back edge here, which I'm putting glue on, doesn't have any finish applied. And then once it had glued for a little while, I went ahead and added a 45-degree chamfer to the back edges. This does two things. It makes that plywood panel dissolve into nothing, and effectively all you see is a nice shadow line. It's a good little trick if you want to use a thicker panel on the back of furniture, but do keep in mind that it's still plywood. I made a plinth off camera, and then we just delivered it. Now, I don't usually film when I'm doing a delivery, but in this case they were happy for me too, so here it goes. The top gets screwed on to the bottom for extra safety, and then all the shelves just get inserted, and we're kind of done. This was a really fun project, but it was a lot of work. I don't know if I would say it was 100% fun, but I definitely had a good time doing it. The customer was really happy with it, and before I even left there was already some books getting placed on it, so we know it's going into a good home, and I can't wait to see some photos of it fully stocked up. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, click that thumbs up button and leave a comment below, and if you haven't already, also click subscribe and check the bell icon so you stay up to date with all of my future videos. If you haven't already, also check out my other channel, which is Maker Addiction, for all things maker. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.